The most comprehensive water quality law to date is the Clean Water Act of 1972. And it had a very ambitious goal of restoring waters considering their chemical, physical, and biological integrity. This was a very tall order, and to do this, what they identified as the steps were to identify polluted or impaired water bodies using a set of criteria. And once these criteria were not met, they would be considered impaired. These impaired water bodies would then be evaluated to see what type of load of a certain pollutant they could receive and still meet their designated uses. This idea of a total load is known as the total maximum daily load, or the TMDL. And while that might seem a little simplified, it is a pretty complex process because each water body is different. Each water body has different natural sources of pollutants. Each water body has different sources as far as agriculture or urban or municipal sources of pollutants. So it is a very complex problem, and there's no one solution that will fit all different water bodies. Because of the complexity of this idea, few of these water quality measures were actively enforced. And this led in the 90s to an era of lawsuits where many different entities sued states and the EPA on their failure to really implement this idea. Florida was no exception to this. There were different parties that stood with Earth Justice and filed a lawsuit in 2008. And they claimed that EPA and FDEP were moving too slowly in Florida, that EPA previously determined that all states needed numeric nutrient criteria, and the EPA was obligated to propose these criteria for Florida as soon as possible. The result of this lawsuit was that EPA administrator signed a proposed rule, and this rule was called the Water Quality Standards for the state of Florida's lakes and flowing waters. This rule applies to everyone. It applies to industries, to wastewater treatment plants, cities, municipalities, agriculture producers, urban landscape managers, basically anybody that contributes some sort of load to a water body. And what this rule means is that there will be numeric concentrations for nitrogen and phosphorus that will be assigned to each water body in the state of Florida. If these are exceeded, the water body would be listed as impaired, and as we discussed a couple slides ago, a TMDL would be required. And that's where this gets a little complicated in how these different contributing sources would be allocated loads as part of this TMDL. Here's a visual of how that might be seen. We would identify the main inputs, and an example would be the ag, the residential, the wastewater treatment plant, and industrial inputs. And then there would be some balancing of these inputs to meet a designated load. How these would be balanced would depend on how the regulators felt this would be done impartially. So it's important to be part of this process so that there's good understanding of the practices already in place by these different sources and the different goals that want to be achieved in the TMDL process.